Look at the difference in the amount of glass in these two lenses. Now the question is, could you vlog with it? One of my favorite lenses to use is also the smallest lens I've ever used. Fujifilm's 27mm 2.8 pancake lens. Some days my goal is to try to keep my kit as pocketable as possible, so I'll usually grab my smaller X-T20 and slap this teeny tiny 27mm on it. This is usually my go-to anytime I'm doing casual walk-around photography for myself or even hardcore minimalist street photography. I'll usually add a wrist strap, set my camera to aperture priority, and just shoot 5.6 or f8 and not even think about settings. It's just such a fun way to shoot. Sometimes I do wish this lens was a little wider sometimes, but there's nothing else that's so teeny tiny unless maybe you pick up a point and shoot like Sony's RX100 line, or like a Ricoh GR camera, which sports an 18mm fixed lens. Now it's great that we have choices and we have tools for the job. I'll take this 27mm out to do street photography, to walk around New York with, and I have done some wildlife photography with it. That's good. That's a New York squirrel for you. So you can get great detail with the small, tiny lens. But I was lucky enough, thank you B&H for letting us play with the 200 to 600mm lens to try some bird photography again and some wildlife photography. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to try this lens is because I love birding. We've done some birding photography videos on this channel, and I wanted something that can zoom as much as my birding binoculars do. I wanted to grab images that I see when I'm looking through the binoculars, and the 600mm on a full frame Sony is about the same magnification as my 8x42 Nikon birding binoculars. And the other thing I did was I put this guy, this 200 to 600, on the Sony a6400 as well to get another 1.5 times reach. And that was a little bit of a challenge because the camera was so small, but it worked great. You can actually use this lens on an APS-C Sony or a full-frame Sony. A couple of cool features here. The lens comes with the AM/MF switch, which is neat. I love any lens that has the AF/MF switch right on there. I don't have to go into any menus. I could just reach over and switch off the autofocus. It has a sort of distance limiter scale. So if you know you're going to be shooting birds from far away or close up, you can set your limit there. It has the image stabilization on there called Steady Shot, and that was so useful. I can shoot 600mm as slow as, like, I would say a 60th of a second or so. I drink coffee, so it's a little bit shaky. But with that image stabilization, I was able to get some sharp photographs at lower ISOs. And when there's enough light, like really bright conditions, and your ISOs are nice and low, you get such great clean images. The problem is if you try to shoot in low light, you have to bump up your ISO. There were a couple of times when I was at 1600 or so just to get good steady shots of birds moving. There were a couple of times I was incorrectly at the wrong ISO, and I was getting some birds with weird heads. So I would say if I was a professional birding photographer, I probably would splurge for like an f4 lens instead of zooming and having a 6.3. With that said, at 6.3, lower ISO, you can get some incredible clear shots. And being the largest lens I ever used, it was like a whole new world. Being able to see birds that were super far away and bring them in close and get shots of them. There were details on some of these birds I never noticed. My favorite being the night heron that I saw. I was just hanging out with this bird. I thought he had one leg for a while. Then he moved, and it turns out his other leg was there the whole time. But it was nice to observe wildlife as well. And I found that I wasn't even using my binoculars. I found that I was using the lens to look around, and I would zoom it to 200 to get kind of like a wider field of view, and then zoom in. Now, if I was a bird photographer, I would probably get a higher resolution camera just because I want to see if I'm shooting birds or wildlife, I really want to see any kind of like fur or feather detail. I feel like I'm always cropping in at least a little bit to get closer and get a better composition of the bird. Another option is a lens that goes to a 400 and have the flexibility of maybe adding an extender, a 1.5 extender or a 2-time extender. That will also bump up your aperture as well, though, if you use an extender, so you have to keep that in mind. But at least you're carrying around a 400 millimeter lens, which is a little smaller, and you know, you have your extenders as that option. This guy paired up with Sony's autofocus system is like a dream if you're a birding photographer. All you have to do, first of all, if the bird is in the sky, if you have like a zone focus, the camera will always find the bird, grab onto it, and with the Sony A7C, it will track it. Anywhere in the frame, the little green box stays on the bird. With the Sony A7 III, if you use a zone, you get the little green dudes on there, the little green boxes that will follow the bird as well. So the autofocus, this guy paired up with Sony's autofocus for bird photography, for bird photography, I found really enjoyable. I will say one negative of the lens is the placement of the focus ring. With the collar put on here, I found that a couple of times I had to, when you have to shoot through the branches to get a bird, sometimes I would switch to manual focus, but this collar is kind of in the way. So I had to focus, I like focusing with my hand under, if this was the focus. But yeah, that was my only negative, was that I was manually focusing with the hand over, which is something you might have to think about. Now, for being a 600 millimeter lens, this guy is not that big. I mean, I've seen 600 millimeter f4s that are huge, that you have to carry around with a tripod and all that stuff. Now, it is winter here, and so I did get great pictures of birds, but sometimes I'm standing in the woods like, what do I photograph now? It's so brown here. And so I did use the lens like looking for patterns in nature and doing a couple of black and whites of patterns in nature and just trying to take in the details out there. Just a bad day of photography out in the wild. You're still out in the wild, you know, taking in the fresh air. So I think I like this lens because I was outside with it, alone, in the quiet, enjoying myself. I would say the only time I was depressed with this lens is when I was in the New Jersey Meadowlands, which is this little marsh area. Now, as beautiful as this place is, it's also a little sad to see trucks and cars, New York City. It's kind of like it's something we have here, but the amount of development and industrialization over these beautiful marshes and wetlands. I mean, New Jersey is an estuary area, it's a wetland area, and these ecosystems are like decimated. So it's a little sad too when you're out here to see the birds hunting, and it's nice that they have this for us, but it's also why we get away, why we go to Banff, Canada, why we... So, yeah. And there was evidence of, like, you know, people dumping stuff, and I could see the highway, and so although I was photographing birds and seagulls and having a good time, there was a tire that was there, and it was also very cold that day. So I was a little sad the day I was shooting at the Meadowlands. I also had fun shooting the moon, set the camera up on a tripod, and also handheld. I got a cool handheld shot of the moon, and that's the first time I really was photographing the moon, and so I could see that being a great thing to do with this lens. Overall, it's too heavy for me. I prefer smaller cameras and smaller lenses, but it was so fun to go outside your comfort zone. If you're a wildlife photographer, always shooting wildlife, then go out to the streets, do a little street photography. I'll see you guys next time.